Hello and welcome back to the Karma Stories podcast. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today I have a little bit of a different one for you. This is a bunch of really short stories that are all HOA based. This is titled, What's Your Nightmare HOA Story? The Karma Stories podcast is published to every major podcasting platform, and you can also read along on YouTube under our @Karma Stories podcast handle. Alright, on to the stories, let's jump right in. What's your nightmare HOA story? This one comes to us from RBF 2000. My at-the-time girlfriend, now wife, rented a townhouse with friends in a community that had an HOA. There was parking reserved for guests of the tenants. Ironically, parking was always an issue for my wife and her roommates, but always simple for me. I just popped on the visitor's pass and was good to go in that lot. I spent the night probably once or twice a week, and one day I awoke to find my car missing. After some ace detective work, I found out that my 10-year-old, at the time, 5-speed manual transmission Honda had not been stolen, but just towed. When I reached out to the HOA, they told me that there was a provision in the bylaws that said a car could only be parked in a visitor spot for a maximum of 72 hours, and that a board member submitted my car to a list of cars to be towed due to abusing a visitor's pass. They argued the language in the bylaws was such that the total amount of time that a car may be parked in the visitor's lot was 72 hours, non-consecutively. If you park there once a week for 10 hours each week, on the 8th week, we are in violation of the policy. This is in opposition to the clear purpose of the provision, which is to prevent people from storing their cars in the lot. They summarily denied my request at the next HOA meeting to recover the $150 towing fee. Long story short, I sued them in small claims court and got back the towing fee plus court costs. Plus, they engaged a lawyer, so I feel good about wasting some of their retainer as well. So you mean to tell me that this HOA retained a lawyer to dispute a $150 fee? What's up with that? Sounds like that was a massive waste of just everybody's time. What's your nightmare HOA story? This one comes to us from a deleted account. We live in a condo and began receiving $100 fines for not picking up dog poop. The area behind our building is a common area and lots of people walk their dogs around. I offered to submit DNA testing for my dogs, and they ignored me and continued to send notices of fines. I began taking my phone with me on every walk and took photos and videos of me picking up poop with time-stamped evidence. I sent a folder full of photos to the HOA with photographic evidence that I was picking up after my dogs. We continued to receive fines. I got a small trash can and kept on my patio and began saving my bags of dog poop for 2 weeks. I did tie the bags, but they were still obviously smelly as poop bags are very thin plastic. I then mailed a box of poop to the HOA office, along with copies of timestamp photos showing I had picked it up. I told them that I had better not ever receive another fine for dog poop because I had provided more than sufficient evidence that it wasn't us. Miraculously, the fine stopped, and we haven't received any for over 2 years. Can you just picture OP sitting down, reading their mail with these fines in it, and it says, "You need to mail us payment," and OP sitting back and going, "I ain't mailing you shit. Wait a minute, that's a great idea." What's your nightmare HOA story? This one comes to us from Cuckoo Keely. Lived in a high-rise in Chicago that had an HOA full of old people with too much money. Fortunately, I was only renting, but I was curious to learn about the HOA, and they were gracious enough to let me sit in. The condo had just built a brand new outdoor patio for grilling, etc. The powers that be didn't like the shade of red of the cobblestone brick that they laid for the area, so they allocated $1 million to redo the entire area with new brick. There were a few attendees who were young professionals who protested, but they were heavily outvoted by the contingent of wealthy old people who felt this was a justifiable use of funds. Outrageous. I'm trying to think of any justifiable reason to spend $1 million to replace bricks that were just put in. It doesn't make any sense. unless one of the board members owns a company that does bricks and paving. That is a definite possibility. What's your nightmare HOA story? This one comes to us from JMPA87. Mother-in-law was fighting stage 4 ovarian cancer a few years ago, had no desire to take down our Christmas lights. We were constantly visiting the hospital, was very touch and go. Had a child under 1, was a very emotional time. HOA compliance officer constantly would stop at our house at all hours of the day. We had security cameras, so finally, after reviewing the footage, we called the guard shack to see what the emergency was. We were told that Christmas has been over for 3 weeks and we need to have our lights down before the end of the month, or he would fine us $25 a day for the first week, then $50 each day after that. We explained the situation and the guy said, "Well, it's not my problem, take your lights down." My wife exploded on the douchebag, went to the next board meeting and let loose on the board and general manager. Turns out it wasn't an HOA policy. The guy worked for the security company that was hired to work the main entrance guard shack and would get a bonus if he would patrol and hand out fines for HOA violations. This butthole would just drive around and make up his own rules and fines, and by the next meeting was fired, and a new security company was hired when the contract was up in the summer. Everything worked out in the end, douche fired, mother-in-law cancer-free for over a year. OP mentioned in a comment that they did take down the lights before the end of the month just to avoid any other fines. This one was interesting to me because where I live, I leave my Christmas lights up all year long. They don't come down at all, but they're smart lights and can be made to be any color. So on Valentine's Day, they're red and pink, and on St. Patty's Day, they're green, etc, etc. It's actually pretty awesome. We also need to comment on one more thing here. Mother-in-law was cancer-free for over a year. That means she came back from stage 4 ovarian cancer. You know what the odds are on that? Holy crap. Congrats to your mother-in-law. What's your nightmare HOA story? This one comes to us from Nico Draws. Was moving to a different city and crashed at my dad's townhouse for a few months to save money for the move. One day, a guy showed up to install a satellite dish that my dad ordered. My dad isn't the type of guy to pay very close attention to HOA rules, and apparently missed a brand new and highly contentious rule that satellite dishes were eyesores and no longer allowed. So just as the installer guy is getting set up to the roof, this couple, head of the HOA, comes sprinting from their townhouse across the street to shut it down, screaming bloody murder. I had absolutely no issue with not getting a satellite dish, it wasn't even my house. But these two HOA thugs were absolutely awful. The wife was just hurling insults at the installer guy and the husband immediately started climbing the ladder up onto the roof to kick the crap out of the installer guy. None of this was provoked at all. It just went from 0 to 100 miles per hour in no time flat, and this couple was out of control. Well, the installer guy eventually had enough of having racist insults hurled at him and came down the ladder and started a full-on brawl with the husband in my dad's driveway. The wife was screaming at the top of her lungs at me, a stoned couch surfer whose only contribution to this whole fiasco was to answer a door and let a guy on the roof. I still vividly remember being absolutely dumbfounded watching these two grown men beat the heck out of each other while I tried to communicate to my dad on the phone over the shrill sounds of some strange woman absolutely berating me for ruining the neighborhood. It was wild. A commenter on this one asked OP to finish the story, so OP said, the wife eventually pulled her husband away from the installer guy, who angrily took his ladder down and launched it into his van and sped off. The couple had a few more choice words for me and then went back across the street. I just stood there flabbergasted. I couldn't believe anybody would react to a situation like they did, instead of just explaining to me, like adults, why I couldn't have the dish installed. Told my dad the whole story that night about how his failure to comply to HOA rules got me in the middle of a street brawl, and he had a good long laugh about it. I'm guessing a lot of people don't know about this, but as of 1996, it is actually illegal for HOAs in the USA to ban satellite dishes. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't read through the whole thing, but there's a bunch of comments here that reference this, and you can check it out on the FCC website under over-air reception devices. What's your nightmare HOA story? This one comes to us from Sue's QP. We have the HOA president from the Third Reich. This man is on such a power trip, you'd think he was running a massive gulag with the lives of 1 million peasants at his disposal. He protects even the most trivial information as if it were top secret intelligence, and dispenses his own brand of justice with no regard for the actual rules. And he's a liar. At the last general HOA meeting, we sat for 40 solid minutes while he regaled us with his vague BS stories about his years as a Special Forces officer in the United States Army. According to him, he's been shot twice, held for ransom in an undisclosed foreign hellhole, and awarded top secret military honors that he isn't allowed to talk about. Here's the thing though, he's maybe 5'5", weighs at least 350 pounds, didn't know how to break down the gym weightlifting equipment, and made a complete butt of himself by saluting a neighbor who came to the meeting late still wearing his BDUs. The neighbor, who works at the nearby military base, laughed out loud and said, "Dude, I'm an E4. Guess who got written up for leaving his garbage cans out?" Sounds to me like this is a case of stolen valor, cause this guy is absolutely BSing. He's a Special Forces guy. They don't talk about their service that much unless they're actually asked to do so, and they're definitely not going to salute an E4. This guy should be required to show some documentation of his service to remain as the HOA president. What's your nightmare HOA story? This one comes to us from Rax Domina. Other way around, my mom was the president of the HOA for her backwoods little neighborhood. Maybe 30 people lived there. Everyone used one well. The well had a problem once, so no one had water. It was $800 for a temporary fix, or $2,000 for a permanent fix. My mom had a meeting where out of the 30 people, 5 showed up. No big deal, those 5 people funded the $800 to get it fixed, since they've been without water for almost a week. No one would split the cost and dues were so low, it didn't cover them, so those 5 people paid for everyone's well. In preparation for the actual fix, she tried to raise money, but only got halfway there when it broke. My mom went door to door asking for everyone's share before they'd fix it. It was like $50. It was another week without water. No one would pay for the well they all used. Finally, around half of the neighborhood raised the money to fix it. Later, they all had a huge barbecue at my parents' house, but the people who didn't pay weren't invited. Oh, screw that. Not only would I not invite them to the barbecue, I'd turn off the water to each one of their houses personally. Every family uses that well, every family should pay for that well. Unless you can show me proof of hardship that you can't afford the $50, yeah, your water's getting shut off. What's your nightmare HOA story? This one comes to us from Whiskey Isn't Enough. Oh boy, do I have a good one. Obligatory not me, but my best friend. My best friend, S, grew up in suburban Arizona. His family owned their home and rarely had any problems with their HOA. It all started with some cardboard boxes. S and his sister, at the ripe age of around 6 or 7, wanted to make a fort in their front yard. Their dad, being the great guy he was, helped them build a crappy cardboard box fort for them to play in. Being kids, they played in the fort for a couple hours and proceeded to get distracted elsewhere. Not a day later, they received posted notices on the door and phone calls informing them they need to clean the unsightly garbage out of their yard or be faced with fines. It wasn't a huge deal, but left the family a bit jaded towards the HOA. Fast forward a handful of years later, S's dad decides he wants to paint the house. Now, if you don't know, most HOAs have strict rules on the color and send templates for you to pick off of. He said the templates range from tan to slightly different tan. S's dad finds a color he likes that's more of a greenish tan and sends it. paints the whole house. The HOA proceeds to have a meltdown because they painted their house outside of the allowed color spectrum. S's dad says, "No effing way, it's basically the same color. I'm not repainting my entire house." So the HOA hires a contractor to come down with a paint color tester and post notices on their door with a detailed analysis of how his color is yucca tan and doesn't fit the spectrum, and if they don't repaint by the end of the month, they will be fined. Instead of folding, S's mom finds out when the next meeting is and discovers no one votes. The same dude has been president of the HOA for way too long, and there is some shady crap going on in terms of contracting. So she walks around the neighborhood the next few weeks, campaigning, and runs. She wins by a landslide. Largest turnout for an HOA meeting since its inception. Apparently, everyone was so sick and tired of the BS, but just bent over. So S's mom is elected president and discovers that the previous regime was doing the ol' hook up my son-in-law by contracting his company and pay him stupid amounts of money to water the sand-washed BS. She quickly ends all that crap. Rather than change any rules other than a few stupid ones, the S family office just decided to refuse to enforce any of them. S's mom goes years as president. Recently, she decided F it and didn't show up to the election, and someone else got elected. Now, the new guy is trying to enforce the old rules, but everyone is so used to the freedom, there is an effing war going on. You know, there's another way to really get around that rule when they have just specific colors that you can use. If you have siding on your house, you paint them in a rainbow of all the colors that you're actually allowed to use, because I'm betting that there isn't a rule saying that the wall has to be entirely the same color. What's your nightmare HOA story? This one comes to us from Arch27. My mom's been going through a lot of stupid HOA crap recently. 2.5 years ago, she needed a new storm door and contacted the HOA to get the proper paperwork for the request. 7 attempts and 3 weeks later, after getting zero reply from the HOA, she decided to just go through with it by contacting the contractor the HOA uses and having them install one of their standard doors. She needed the door changed because the one in place was broken and didn't want to risk having to endure them installing in late fall or winter. This past November, the HOA contacted her saying her door was in violation of their standards and that she was required to change it before January. She contacted a lawyer over it, and long story short, she has to change the door. I told her that the HOA can go F themselves because she tried to do it their way and they never responded. On top of that, who didn't notice the door in 2 years' time? It's obvious it's not the same as the doors on the other condos from as far back as you can see her unit. The real story here is that the guy in charge of the HOA is a power-tripping butthole who enforces the bylaws whenever he feels like it. Complete big fish in a little pond scenario, but he's really a small fish in the smallest pond, pushing around a 65-year-old retiree over a $300 door, which for some reason they told her was nearly $4,000, is Bush League BS. Kinda sounds to me like that HOA is working with a contractor that they have a deal with, because no door should be $4,000 for the front of the house, unless it comes with like a full-time doorman. What's your nightmare HOA story? This one comes to us from RJJM88. There was a war between two of my neighbors. You see, we had regulations as to what kind of trees you could have. Someone had planted these beautiful cherry blossom trees and lovingly cultivated them from saplings, but got told repeatedly that they were against HOA policy. The homeowner told the president to go F himself. This is not an exaggeration. According to what I heard, the guy literally said, "Go F yourself," and left. The HOA president snuck over to the guy's house and cut down the trees at night. So the homeowner, rather than filing a suit, decided to do the same thing. He went to the HOA president's house and cut down his trees. Again, rather than calling the cops, the HOA president decided to start hacking up his bushes in the middle of the day. We moved before this somehow concluded itself, but man, upper middle class, middle-aged white people are weird. You know, for the OP in this one, there was an easy way to solve this. Go cut down the president's tree, sure, why not? But then, in your property, put some bear traps in places that maybe they wouldn't be able to find them, and just see what happens. Of course, this is not legal advice. If you enjoy daily Reddit stories, I encourage you to follow and add us to the favorites on whichever podcast platform you enjoy the most. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button and drop a like on the video, it really helps us out. I thank you for watching and listening, I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.